In our last discussion with Mr. Vinod Rai, the 11th Controller and Auditor General of India, we talked about how corporate India needs to put ethics in their DNA, especially after the New Companies Act 2013. We spoke a little bit about the importance of whistleblowers and the importance of how we need to make sure whistleblowers don't get victimized, we ensure there's anonymity, and we take whistleblowers seriously on a go-forward basis. In this series, we are going to talk a little bit more about the private sector and recommendations he has for the private sector and how they can focus a little bit more on the substance and not just stick to the form, which means really give the right tone at the top. So the senior management needs to tell them what's the right thing, and also in substance what everybody needs to follow in the corporate sector so that we show better governance.
So one of the first questions I wanted to ask, taking a cue from your book, which was not just an accountant, which I think really shaped up the Indian environment. Just one thing we wanted to ask you is that as it relates to the private sector, any learnings from your book and your experience which you would like to share with private sector on what best practices they should put in place to improve their governance and compliance as you see it?
See, I would sincerely believe that whether it's a government sector or the private sector, time has come when each one of us, our decision-making processes, etc., we are accountable to it all. And I'm fond of saying that all decision makers today kind of sit in glass houses, where each action of them is being seen by their colleagues and the world outside. Now, the most important thing that we need to cater for today is to ensure that governance within the systems that we operate is premised on ethics and probity. And I think that operates as well as it operates in a private corporation as it does in government.
Would you say, sir, in India in the private sector, everyone kind of says the right thing, but in substance actually does something different? Do you think that the difference between spirit and form is kind of coming closer in the last few years as you see it, or does India in the corporate sector still have to move towards where in substance they actually do the right thing?
No, I sincerely feel that we are moving to a situation where they are both converging. I mean, what is said for form's sake and what is said for substance, I think are both converging, because the realization has dawned, even in private corporations today, that if you have to be known globally, and today every other country is plugged into each other country, in terms of trade relations, in terms of information, in terms of knowledge, etc., where if you have to be known globally and if you have to be known as a company which is in the business to stay for long run, you have to ensure that is not only for form's sake, not only optical, but you're doing it for long-term sustainability, which means you are in there for substance.
Follow-up question, to that is there are areas like the PPP, Panchayati Raj system and societies, which I understand are not covered under the ambit of CAG. Do you feel the government should do something around there? Do you think we're missing something in those areas?
You see, what happened in Indian context is that the Audit Act of India, or for the Auditor General for India, is of 1971. 1971 did not have, at that time we didn't have concepts like public-private partnership, we didn't have joint ventures, and in any case the 73rd and 74th Amendment to the Constitution, which introduced Panchayati Raj institutions or urban local bodies, had not been introduced. So that's why the Act missed out on these things. But later on, government has realized that a large number of government projects are being purveyed through these structures. And now government is ensuring that each one of these spending or government projects which are being devolved through these structures are also being brought into the audit mandate of the CAG.
So they won't slip through the cracks?
They won't slip through the cracks, because presently it's being done by an executive instruction. Soon an amendment to the Audit Act is underway.
When you were an auditor in a CAG and as your book said, not just an accountant, question is, if you're doing an audit of a company, do you think the company, a lot of CEOs say that they have 50,000 employees in the organization. They can't make sure that every employee is doing the right thing. If they put in adequate procedures, policies, code of conduct, procedures, would any auditor take cognizance of that and give them benefits? So in your time, was it really the specific transaction, or do you said, okay, this company at least tried to do it the right way, even though they kind of got blindsided? I mean, any thoughts on that?
Decision making, whether in government or in any corporate, your decisions are being taken every other day. And quite often, based upon the parameters which are on your table today, you take a decision which 3 days later, 3 months later may turn out to be wrong. But on the basis of the parameters that were before you on that particular day, that could have been the only correct decision you could have taken. Now, see, for the auditor as much as for anybody doing investigation also, it's very important to try and make the distinction between an act of omission and an act of commission. An act where, in good faith you've taken a decision, but willy-nilly it's gone awry. And it can happen to any one of us at any point of time because we are taking decisions every day. The other is when it's premeditated, planned much in advance, and hence it's an act of commission. And I've used to tell all the training institutions within the Auditor General's establishment that, look, an auditor must have a very strong nose to be able to detect where it was an act of omission and where it's an act of commission, and where it's, it's procedural issues which have been overlooked, peripheral procedural issues overlooked, doesn't matter as long as the decision has gone right.
I think that's really, because most CEOs do worry about that.
And it's very genuine. It's very, the worry is genuine, the concern is genuine.
But so that's a really good point, sir. So you think tone at the top, whether it's the government or the private sector, is really the most important. Unless the top says something, the bottom is not going to change.
Absolutely. The message has to come from the top. And the admissibility message also came from the top, unfortunately. And because media today has become self-pervading. Media is all over the place and it's 24/7. And media is the one which communicates what happened at the top and what happened. And that's why the man down below is seeing what is happening at the top and is beginning to believe that, yes, there is the point there.